Good evening. Thanks for turning up today. It's great turnout. Great to see. My name is Shauna. I'll be your panel moderator today. I run a brand consultancy firm and also started personal branding, yourpersonalbrand.com. So in a way, this topic is quite close to my heart. And tonight, I think we have a great panel and include the media personality, Denise, and Ferry, who's a lecturer at NTU School of Communications, and Ben, who's head of McCann Advertising Agency, and Claire. Sorry, I didn't get you.
Claire Perbula, I'm Senior Vice President for Wildfire Social Marketing Technology.
Wonderful. Maybe I just start with a quick vote. One of the speakers in the film said, "Are things better? Do you think things are better for women today?" Whether, given that we have advanced a great deal in terms of college acceptance and graduation and jobs for women, but on the other hand, the portrayal of women in media seems to be kind of declining. So show of hands, do we think things are better? How many of you think better for women? Really? That bad? Right. So what about the panelists? How many think things are better for women today? Claire, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I've always been, for most of my career, the only woman doing what I do. And that, to me, has become rather normal, which is a bit sad, I think. I think that what I'm seeing, though, is I'm seeing that women that are coming to me with interest in jobs or whatever are coming with so much more passion, and I hate to use the word aggressive because it's got a negative connotation, but so much more confidence in themselves and what they have to offer. So in that regard, I think that it is very much changing. I think that also what has helped is the fact that because those of us that have been in our careers for some time, we've really had to hone our collaboration skills because, we have been in an environment in which being a woman is unusual. And so we've gotten used to how to navigate through the good old boys network that happens to be there or maybe gets in our way. And I think that's actually made us, our toolkit, much more sharper. So from that perspective, I think we've all gotten better. Those that have, of us that have had long careers, and likewise I'm seeing what's coming out of school really impressive. So, I see it as being positive.
After watching the film, not so positive. Actually, the thing that struck me was not even so much a gender conversation. It was more a general worry for human nature, which I definitely think has a greater impact, especially on women in leadership. But I think, in general, I think there are many lessons that came out of the past hour, and I think they are far greater than workplace.
It's not all in the workplace, definitely not.
Yeah, better or not, it depends where you are, perhaps. This is an American documentary, very obvious American documentary, and I wonder what European filmmakers would have done with the subject, or what Asian filmmakers would have done with the subject. And also, if you look at the ultimate message here is, can we create an environment where women are no longer underrepresented in positions of power? How does that work in different parts of the world? And from what I understand from the documentary, I wonder if things are going in the right direction in the United States, but that feeling I've had already before I saw this. And perhaps the more social democrat philosophy that you will find among the peoples in Europe, and particularly northern part of Europe, where gender equality is is at a more advanced level, perhaps, than in other parts of the world. But a few years ago, when I was still living in Europe, I was part of an initiative called Equal Salary. And this was a fight of a number of people for equal pay for men and women in Switzerland, of all places. And even there, when we started, 85% of the women working population was underpaid, paid less than their male counterparts. So even in Europe, things are not very well. And then if you go back to Asia, the first thing I thought here was, aren't we lucky to have the Straits Times? And TV censorship. What's the chance of women getting in positions of power in Asia, in a more broader term? Because there are, of course, some amazing examples, like Miss Bhutto in Pakistan some years ago. And then what's the role of women in positions of power in the Middle East, for example? So it's an impossible question to answer. For me, it is more like, where are you in the world? And you will find different answers, I think.
I think it's very true, being in the media for almost a decade now here in Asia Pacific. I started my career working for an American network, which was Viacom. I was an MTV VJ, and all across Asia, my face could be seen. And I represented the youth, but also the bridge to the West, whereby we would play music videos that were harmless back then. And then as I progressed, learning more about the channel, there were certain videos that could be played after hours, and they were a little bit more raunchy. And, when you see things like that, there's a lot of glitz and glamour, but I also know that, through censorship, which helps it a lot, the programming is key to any network's responsibility. So I think in the initial years when I was a youth representative, a youth ambassador, we were told as MTV VJs that we represented a certain demographic, and we had to be very mindful and be very responsible of culture, race, religion, to stay away from things like politics, that it was about the music. We are trying to save the music, but I guess film got glossier, and fashion got glossier, and direction got glossier, and sex got glossier. And I couldn't quite grasp what was going on. I mean, when I started watching Britney Spears, I wasn't sure what she was doing in her video, whether she was actually, singing and producing music, or was she dancing, And of course, that has an impact on youth because they want to emulate such music characters. But I grew up with different music. I grew up with the Rolling Stones and, and much older music of the past, which of course many kids nowadays don't know or fail to want to know. What I'm trying to say is that it is territory-based. This film is made in America. This is a problem in America. It is trickling into Asia because we are a globalized world. Everything is a size zero now. It's not about a language barrier anymore. Cultures are crossing, and faces are changing. And I think I wished I had seen a documentary like that on MTV when I was a VJ. I think that would have helped a lot of youth whilst working as an MTV VJ, because we addressed a lot of pro-social causes during our MTV times, such as HIV and AIDS, teenage pregnancies, contraception, violence, teenage bullying. Very heavy topics, but I guess, we've come to the point where this is something that we also need to address, the overall picture of what it means to be a girl.
Right. Following on some of the comments on actors and models in that film, Have you personally been subjected to that sort of demands by your producers?
All the time. You're kidding. They don't do it to me anymore because I'm old. I guess, when I was starting out as a model, it was very interesting. I was told many times that I had flabby arms, I had thick thighs because I was a gymnast. I was a very active child. I loved gymnastics, did it for like 13, 14 years. And when I scored my first modeling cover, the first thing the photographer said, how do we correct those arms? I mean, those arms are so big. And when you're that age, I think I was 14 years old, I think that really does have an effect on you. Because I went home crying. I went home to my mother saying, I thought this was going to be the best thing ever. I'm going to do a photo shoot. I'm going to wear glamorous clothes. And people are going to see me in this magazine. Nah, it was far from that. I was crying from shoot to home, and I crawled into bed because I didn't fit the part. I was fat, but I wasn't fat. I was, I was active. I was young and vivacious, and I wanted to explore all kinds of, things, and my mom allowed me. But yeah, from a very early age, and also, being an MTV VJ, sometimes you'd get a rock star that would go, what are you doing later on, Here's my number. And there would be that quite a regular thing that female VJs were kind of addressed that way. And we had to be very careful. We had to look at our minders and say, cut that interview, or I don't feel comfortable. I don't want to go there. And I guess I had a good head on my shoulders and I was able to do that. But I'm sure in other areas of media, other girls would make that decision, constantly.
Right. So Ben, you're on that other side. The dark side, right?
I'm feeling quite uncomfortable even more. I think there were a couple of really interesting points that came out of the movie in respect to the industry which I'm in. And I think if I go back to the very first question in terms of we seeing things better today within my industry, I think there's been a huge change in the last 18 months. Now, I mean, I know that's a very short time period in terms of the history of what we're talking about, but we've seen some incredible campaigns like the work coming out for Dove, which has had a fundamental shift on the way that we look at products and how we buy and how we use advertising. Now, I think, again, and I can't remember the exact quote, but if you don't see it, you won't have anything to aim for. Now that we're starting to see these campaigns, and it's not just about, and it made me think actually, because we were talking about conscious capitalism, but there was one point in there which, and I love consumerism, by the way, it's my whole job, everything is about making sure that people consume. But I think there was one of the points which I thought was wonderful, was actually, and I don't know if it's a term that exists, but I thought of it as conscious consumerism, which is where someone mentioned that the power of making this change lies within the people who hold the purse strings, and that there is a decision that the consumer needs to make that says, actually, I want to see more of this type of behaviour or more of these types of products. So I think there is some change that is happening there. Now, on the other side, I think in the last 18 months we have seen some of the worst images I've ever seen in my life. We have seen photoshopping, which is, I mean, if you were to look at it in any other circumstance, it's kind of comical. There was that wonderful interview on Ellen where she interviewed the woman who had been ridiculously photoshopped, and the model came out with arm extensions in her arm to say no, that she really looks like that. But her arms were at least a foot longer than that was even possible. So I think whilst there are changes happening which are positive, there are still negatives that are taking shape. However, and I'd like to move this back to you, mainly to get the spotlight off me, this wonderful invention of the internet, which I say with a slight smile, because I don't think it's made the world that much better in a lot of ways. But the internet has allowed censorship to have less of the ability to control, and I think that's a major issue. But I also think that one of the great things about social is that it's allowed for groups to self-control and self-mediate. So, you know, a lot of things, way more than in the 5 or 10 years previous, we are seeing a huge amount of people who are actually putting it out there and saying, this is not acceptable. And we are seeing mainstream media pick it up. We are seeing people like the Ellen DeGeneres show and so forth actually picking it up as a main story and saying, we're going to make fun of this even further, which I think, again, we will start to see more and more signs of good media happening.
I thank you for that kind of lead into the whole social marketing space, because that's what's exciting right now is that brands are really understanding that the influencer is where they need to be spending their time, is accessing that 8% that are driving 80% of the conversation. And of that 8%, as Pat Mitchell in the video said, that's 80% women. They're the ones that have the largest network. They're the ones that research. Men, typically, they see something, they buy it, right? You know, they like it or they don't research it. Women research it, try to understand it, collaborate, talk to their peers, you know, so, and then make a decision. Or go online and research it. And so getting the straight facts in the hand of the key influencer is really important for a brand. And I think in that respect, it's kind of taken the power back to us, the common man, right? That we can, in fact, have a say in something that's inappropriate. It becomes now a risk. There's groups within companies that assess the risk of what's being said out in social media to their organization. Because if something goes viral, it doesn't matter if it's correct, incorrect, it just goes. And it has the same damning effect as if it was real. So, you know, if somebody has says that, this whiskey brand has been putting coloring in their whiskey. And even though it's not based on fact, it isn't true, the sales will drop, right? So I think the brands and the marketers are understanding that there needs to be some alignment and that an educated consumer is a better consumer. So getting the straight facts out to those people that are, and so in that regard, I feel like there's hope for us Americans. I think, am I the only American on the panel? I felt like I should apologize after that movie because it is so deeply, rooted in America. I was thinking the whole time watching this, how did this happen? Because, I probably have lived through all this, right? So I'm thinking as a kid, I guess women are always, even when you're young, it's like if you're a little bit different, then that can't be good, right? It's about trying to get sameness all the time. And I kind of feel like then that spirals out of control as we get older and we apply it on other things. So shame on me. I'm sorry if I caused all this here. But, I really don't know if this is the same kind of phenomena that other, as you mentioned, other countries have been feeling in the media. I assume that because we're so global, it's going to be somewhat similar. But I think that this is probably what we're seeing in the U.S. extreme. And, it saddened me. I had no idea what the content completely was going to be of this movie, and I was quite sad at the end of it because I think we have responsibility, women, men, everybody, to make this right. So.
Well, for my social media or even online media, the images we're bombarded every day. I'm so glad that I don't have daughters. I have 2 boys. And I think there are many young women here today, and I'd like to hear from you as well. What do we see? We see Miley, we see Rihanna, we see Kim Kardashian, right? Showing every part of their body imaginable, right? Selfies and so on. And the other day, another gentleman, parent, is speaking and said, my daughter, the first thing she checks is on her Facebook or Instagram how many likes she had the day before of the photo she posted online, right? That's the world that we live in now. And before I open up maybe to get questions, especially from young people or mothers of who have daughters who are teenagers. Ferry, you are a lecturer. You have many students, female students, and how do you see them, reacting to this media perception, and how does it impact them and their self-worth? Yeah.
Well, I'm very privileged. Is it? I work with students who are in communication studies, and this is a subject they have selected themselves, unlike some other subjects which are selected by their parents. And what I find is year after year, incredible talent, intelligent, funny, absolutely splendid, all of them. Very difficult at the end of the year when the exams are done to do the grading, because we have to follow certain rules, which doesn't allow us to give A pluses to all of them. And it really is a very, very hard choice all the time. So in that respect, I'm very positive. And the majority of my students are females. And that is because it's mostly women who end up in communications nowadays. So in that respect, I'm very positive about what I see here in Singapore. But as a comment to what you just said, this is not just about girls. This is happening with boys too. And it's, the film was made 4 years ago, and it's already aged, because the numbers that were given at the beginning in terms of how many hours young girls watch television, I doubt would be still true today, because I don't think they watch any television at all. I think they spend all of their time online and using social media. And so that brings me to what you just said. How can we solve this problem? And Secretary Rice said, we need to have the right candidates, so she still talks about role models. And we need we need psychological breakthroughs, and I can't, agree more with her. But it also made me think, what role can the different sectors play? What role does the public sector have to play in this respect? And what role does can the social sector, and I think an increasingly important role, and you just mentioned the role of the private sector. Dove was mentioned, that's Unilever, and here is an example of a responsible company in many aspects of life. And it made me think, that the private sector can possibly play a much larger role than it does today, to solve this incredible, crazy issue. Because according to The Economist, this is about 3 years ago, if men and women would be equally represented in the top of the private and public sectors, the impact on the global economy would be 30 to 40%. Think of that. That's what we're losing day after day and year after year by going the way we are going.
One of the things that struck me, and I feel guilty because I'm wearing a suit jacket and talking as a and talking as a business person. One of the things that was most confronting was actually watching that as a dad, and I think I think most of us sat there, those with kids sat there, thinking about the effect that has, and it is absolutely terrifying. Which again, I'll bring it back to the point that you were making. I think the responsibility that we have and the concern that I have for the human race is more around how are we teaching our children, and the story that I tell, and I'll do it as quickly as I can, mainly because my wife is sitting in the audience and she'll probably throw something at me. We have a beautiful 7-year-old daughter, and we have a beautiful 5-year-old son. My son and I have been struggling to get on, mainly because my mum says it's DNA kicking me in the arse. We're very, very similar, and we'd been clashing. So I was reading this book. It was written by a New Zealand author called Ian Grant, and he'd written a book called Growing Great Boys, and I'd read half of the book. I'm still going, but there was one sentence that absolutely floored me, and I think it's perfect for this, which was what he had written was that my job as a father was not to teach my son how to be a good boy, it was to teach him how to be a great father. And I think there is a reflection in that, in exactly what we're talking about here, because I think our responsibility as old people is to make sure that our children are growing up with the experiences and the qualities that we actually want the world to change in later. So my question would be, why is our education system not supporting things around leadership development, I mean, I can imagine our kids at 5 and 7, why is it that they are not practicing having girls leading the teams, and they talk about that as part of gender equality and the fact that it's important that we have women in leadership? Why are we not seeing, and again, one of the conversations that we have with our son, who is this beautiful bundle of masculine energy, and we haven't necessarily taught him that, but one of the things that we have to say to him is, you know, he's one of those rah-rah boys. He's always flexing his muscles. He's always, and one of the comments that we say to him is, Felix, you've got it. Being strong is wonderful. You've got to use that strength to protect people, not to hurt people. Now, as a 5-year-old, that's a concept that he doesn't necessarily understand. But the fact that we're reinforcing that message is teaching him how to be hopefully be a contributor to the community later. And I think so. You know, I think there's this massive this massive need to us to relook at the source and the root cause of where our things are going and steer the world into a better place. And the last point I wanted to make, which was a reinforcement of the fact that this is it's not. Selfies are not gender biased, and they're also not age biased, because I would say that a lot of the people in this room also check their Facebook statuses to make sure that they've got likes, and that I think is also something that we're reinforcing, which is wrong, because it shouldn't be about whether or not other people approve of what you've put out there. It should be about whether or not there's a contribution that has been made, and we should be celebrating that kind of stuff. And I think, again, this has got nothing to do with advertising. It's got nothing. This is more of a personal opinion, but I think this is where the world is reinforcing itself in a way that is more harmful. So I think that whole, again, taking it back to that conscious point, is that we need to be relooking at every decision we make, not just about the brands and so forth. It's every single decision we make is having an effect and a reaction, and if we don't re-steer that, we're going to end up on well, we won't end up on a planet, because it's, you know, global warming's going to end that anyway, but you know, but it's pretty scary, and again, I think my last story about my son, we were crossing over the bridge in Robinson Key recently, and no offence to any of you who smoke, but he said, "Daddy, why is that person smoking?" And I said, "Well, you know, we don't think it's very healthy," and he said, but doesn't he know that it's not healthy? Should we tell him? And I said, "Well, I'm pretty sure he will know that it's not healthy, but why is he doing it?" Well, some people decide that that's what, but Daddy, why? He knows it's, and this, I think, is another version of that. We know it's not right for this inequality to exist. We know that it's not right for there to be discriminations between races, sexes, whatever it is, and yet we are constantly reinforcing behaviours that not even that reinforce them to continue. Actually, I think part of the problem is we don't bloody do anything, and so that in itself reinforces it. Sorry, that was a very high horse. I'll get off it, and I'll make sure that I...
But are we like not fighting a losing battle? You know, so I think looking good, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm in personal branding, and I think everyone look at you. First perception counts, right? Whether you're in business, education, or whatever. But it's really like, what is that image you project says about you, right? Looking good, looking healthy, right? Being fit. There is nothing wrong with that. But when you go overboard, or when you go to a very sexualized image of yourself, then what does that project to the world, to the opposite sex, to your colleagues or partners and so on? So Denise, you have anything to add to that point, being in the media?
I think for me, what was most important was that I needed to establish myself as a filmmaker, because I had been given an opportunity to be in front of the camera, to be an ambassador of so many causes and so many brands. And after a while, you want to start defining who you are and what you want to do. So my sole mission was, during the MTV days, I went to New York